Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. It's a common experience, one where you are lying in bed, desperate to get a good night's sleep, but the proverbial Sandman is nowhere to be found. Now, in this situation today, we might reach for warm milk, put on some music or a podcast, or even turn the AC down to make it a bit cooler. But before these remedies were available, there was one timeless practice available to everyone: counting sheep. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, counting sheep means, quote, as a soporific, to count imaginary sheep jumping over an obstacle one by one, end quote. Thank you, Oxford English Dictionary, for making us reference other things in your dictionary to understand what the heck you just said. So, soporific is not a common English word. I will note it means, quote, inducing or tending to induce sleep, causing a person to sleep or slumber, end quote. And so, counting sheep is a way to fall asleep by counting imaginary sheep doing simple tasks like jumping over a wall or moving through a gate. I couldn't find much actually recorded about why history thought counting sheep would make you fall asleep, but in a 2024 article from CNN Wellness, Sandy Lamont notes, quote, history supposedly provides the answer. It was said to be a way for medieval shepherds, devoid of human company for weeks at a time, to fall asleep each night. They counted their sheep until drowsy. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. What is clear is that the concept of counting sheep to sleep is so old it was mentioned in the 13th century compilation of short stories titled Cento Novelle Antiche. In one of the novellas, a storyteller in the service of Messer Azzolino was so sleepy that he told his master a tale of a farmer trying to get a flock of sheep across a swollen river in a small boat. So he jumped in with a single fleece and began to row with all his might, the storyteller said. The river was broad, but he rowed and he rowed away. The storyteller stopped talking as he fell asleep, prompting his master to prod him awake to finish the tale. Let him get over the remainder of the sheep, and then I will proceed, for it will take him a year at least, and in the meantime your excellency may enjoy a very comfortable slumber, the fabulist replied before nodding off again. The same tale was told in the earlier 12th century work Disciplina Clericalis, and even became part of the 17th century book Don Quixote. Only in this version, Quixote's squire Sancho Panza tells him to count goats, not sheep, end quote.
If there are more goats in the area, then that makes sense.
Now, we're going to hear more from this article about whether or not science thinks counting sheep works in our behind-the-scenes video, which airs every Friday on Patreon. That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. For now, though, we know there are a few historical things to show the concept has been around for a long time, and counting sheep was a real activity that needed to be done. So there are tons of English references to counting sheep throughout the years, usually in the context of agrarian settings like raising sheep. And I learned a lot more than I needed to about a score being 20. I know we've talked about it when we talked about the term scoring, a score being 20 people, and they would count to 20 because that's as far as you could get before you would kind of eyes glaze over and lose count. So each person would count to 20 with marks on their rod that they were using. So yeah, it's like there's this whole process for being able to count sheep, specifically counting sheep without falling asleep doing it, you know,
Yeah.
so, or losing count or what have you. So there's a lot of stuff in there where that talks about it, but it's, you know, it's in the literal counting of literal sheep, right? So the first time I could find the specific allusion to counting sheep in English referring to sleep instead of that literal counting of sheep was in the mid 1800s. Though the phrase even to this day has so many varieties, it is tough to identify every usage. And so I'm certain there are earlier examples of the figurative usage that either I didn't see or just haven't been digitized or cataloged. So this example I mentioned is from the 1854 work Way Down East by Seba Smith. While this doesn't include our exact phrase, the concept is clearly being used here. Quote, thus far, up to the evening before the wedding day, everything looked fair and promising. Peter retired to bed early in the hope of getting a good night's rest, but somehow or other he never was so restless in his life. He shut his eyes with all his might and tried to think of sheep jumping over a wall. But do all he could, sleep wouldn't come. End quote. So we see that he's not talking, he doesn't use the word counting sheep, but like he's obviously counting sheep. He just, he phrases it slightly differently.
Right.
But yeah, so that's a very clear usage of sheep jumping over a wall for the purpose of falling asleep. That's also the earliest attestation the Oxford English Dictionary notes as well. So I don't feel horrible that I couldn't find anything earlier. They do this for a living. Here's another example, this one from an 1896 book titled Preparation for Motherhood by Elizabeth Robinson Scoville. In the chapter titled Means of Inducing Sleep, the author notes that fatigue can help sleep come, but over-fatigue can drive away sleep. For the times of overfatigue, excitement, anxiety, or distress, the author notes, quote, "There are a few mental exercises that may be tried besides the time-honored one of counting sheep leaping over a hedge or running through a gap. One of these is counting steadily, always beginning with 1, or rather returning to it as 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. It is very monotonous, and one does sometimes drop asleep under its influence." End quote.
I could see that, and also no, I could not do that.
Yeah, I notice it's not so much sleepy for me, but there's a mindfulness practice that I used to use when I would run all the time, and so I would count my steps, and I would just start 1, 2, 3, and every time my foot hit the ground, I would count it, and I would count up to see how far I could get, and I was just focusing on the numbers, right, and focusing on the steps, and to see how far I could get before I lost track. And if I ever got to a point where I wasn't sure what number I was on, then I would have to start over again. And,
Right.
it helped me focus on being in that moment while I was running for those times when I just wasn't in the mood to listen to music or something. And it wouldn't make me sleepy, but and probably because I was doing physical activity, but what it would do for me is it would, it showed me that my brain will just like, move on to something else at some point. And
Yeah.
oftentimes before I even got to 100, but I don't think I ever got over 150. But I did notice the more I did it, the higher I could get, like over time, over about 3 or 4 months that I was using this, at least during some portion of my run, I did
Right.
notice that I was getting higher and higher. So I felt like, I don't know if it means I'm being more mindful, but I certainly it was helping my attention, I guess, in that one specific area.
Right.
Unless I'm counting sheep, though, I'm not sure, literal sheep, literal counting of literal sheep. I'm not sure it's
Like, is it
super
gonna
helpful.
be
Does
a
it translate
good-
to anything else? I don't know.
So it is a mindfulness practice, though, in some other things, and it not necessarily counting, but going through a familiar list of things,
Mhm.
or just making a list and then repeating that list.
Right.
Is kind of a mindfulness practice that is used in some things, some different meditations and things like that. And it's useful in helping people kind of train themselves to remember things. It's not necessarily that you're going to change your brain on some large scale. Maybe, I don't know, but
Right.
but it's more about that, memory training for kind of keeping things short-term memory and kind of coding your brain to be able to do that. So
Right. Well, and I feel like this article in this article, she mentions those mental exercises. And I feel like it really gets at the heart of why counting sheep could work for people, because it's monotonous. And if you're not doing any physical activity and you're not doing other things and you're just focused on that, you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over again.
yeah, that's why I sometimes fall asleep at my desk. So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So like for some people that puts them to sleep, not everybody's brain works the same way. So, it's like obviously nothing works for everybody. That's why you've got to have lots of different ways, because some will work for some people, some will work for others. And sometimes the thing that works for you this time won't work next time. All right, the phrase really took off in the 1920s, and we see that in Google's Ngram as well. And this is largely due to the Pulitzer Prize-winning play Beyond the Horizon by Eugene O'Neill. The play was written in 1918, but it didn't premiere until 1920, and it was a smash hit. Here is a line from Act 3, Scene 1. Quote, "I couldn't get to sleep to save my soul. I counted 10 million sheep if I counted one." End quote. The concept here is sound, but as with many examples, it isn't specifically using the phrase counting sheep. Instead, it adds additional descriptors or works it into the sentence. In this case, the same concept, counted 10 million sheep, right?
Right.
Here's another example from the Democratic Messenger out of Maryland, USA, and this is dated December 10th, 1921. And in the article titled, Brings Sandman in a Hurry, they charge that counting sheep is no longer valid in today's modern world. Quote, counting sheep used to be the great recipe for going to sleep. You simply closed your eyes, imagined a rail fence with a gap in it, and white woolly sheep jumping through, one at a time. You counted them carefully as they came, and you dropped off to slumberland. But the amateur psychologist says counting sheep is old-fashioned and impractical now. The trouble was, he explains, that people used their imagination too much. Instead of confining themselves solely to the sheep, they would imagine a whole pasture with trees and hills and a sky full of clouds beyond, and their attention was so diffused keeping track of the landscape that they couldn't keep the minds concentrated on the sheep. Presently, they lost their interest, and then old man insomnia camped on their trail for several hours. End quote. The amateur psychologist, indeed, because this is like one person's experience and they're relating it to everyone.
Yeah.
It's even worse because the amateur psychologist goes on to say that he imagines the inside of a cathedral with a single ray of light falling on an endless procession of hooded monks moving slowly down the aisle instead of sheep in the field. So I don't know how that isn't just as susceptible to the same problem as the field, with cathedrals famous for their intricate windows and tapestries.
Right. I'm thinking like, wait.
Yeah, so I don't know if this guy is advocating moving from agrarian image to a religious one, or if it's just that he paints too big a picture for the field, but he's able to narrow it in with a cathedral. I don't know. I don't know what, where the logic behind that came from. It doesn't feel like that would withstand scrutiny or testing among a representative sampling of an audience, but who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe they did things differently in 1921.
That's very interesting.
Maybe they were building very, very boring cathedrals.
See, and here's what happens in my head with this stuff is like, if I ever actually try to count sheep, I'm going to remember this guy, and then I'm going to imagine these monks carrying sheep, and those are the sheep you're counting, I mean, like, it just
because a monk is now carrying a sheep because of these two things.
There have to be sheep,
Yes.
I don't know. Like, this is, it doesn't work, I think, this kind of thing for the ADHD brain.
Yeah, well, not for yours anyway.
Not for mine, yeah.
Like there's a wide variety of people even who have made the same processes. So yeah, but I think that's part of like counting sheep. Maybe it does work for some folks. We'll find out in the behind the scenes. But it certainly won't work for everyone. That's for sure. Now here's another reference to the phrase. This one from the Washington Daily News out of Washington D.C., USA, and it's dated July 14th, 1941. Traditionally a hot time of year in the United States, and this article is about how to sleep cool when it's so hot outside. It begins, quote, forget about Washington's swelter when you're trying to drop off to sleep after a hard day's work. Counting sheep won't do a bit of good. Concentrate instead on making a cool oasis of the room you sleep in, end quote. So this is another example of saying counting sheep won't be effective and offering alternative concepts. In it, they have a series of photos of a woman taking all sorts of steps. And so they suggest a fan with a bowl of ice cubes in front of it, which I guess makes sense, as according to the United States Department of Energy, air conditioning was a luxury item in the United States until after World War II. A few other recommendations from the article include a medium temperature shower just before bed, putting your hair up in an upsweep to allow airflow around your neck, adding talcum powder to your sheets, and my personal favorite, sleeping raw.
No.
Sleeping raw is their way of saying sleeping naked. And thank you, 1941. I will now call it sleeping raw for the rest of my life. That is glorious.
So much worse.
Oh my goodness, I love it.
So much worse.
Sleeping raw. Yeah, sleeping in raw. can't. That's so. Oh my goodness. I am going to call it that forever
It's
now.
terrible. I kind of wonder if that's true. Like, okay, maybe it depends on like the fabric of the sheets and stuff, you know? I bet that makes a difference there. In
It does, actually. They do talk about that, adding talcum to the sheets, but they say use a firm mattress and
uh-huh.
make sure your sheets are firm on it. And then they talk about different kinds, with one kind being better. And if you can't do that, do linen, but linen's still better than cotton. And so, like, they walk through like different kinds of sheets that would be helpful as well.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, one more before the break here. This one is actually what led me to research the phrase as an episode topic. I recently read a passage in the book The Irving Berlin Reader by Benjamin Sears that included an excerpt from a letter Berlin wrote to Joe Schneck for 20th Century Fox Films. The letter was dated September 5th, 1952. Quote, Dear Joe, I'm dictating this letter to you over the telephone from the Catskills, where I've been since I left Hollywood. First, let me tell you that I feel just great. I've had several nights of good sleep without too much help. Also, for the first time in a long time, the work is coming faster and better. I'm enclosing a lyric of a song I finished here, which I'm going to publish immediately. That is, after I get some good recordings. You have always said that I commercialize my emotions, and many times you are wrong, but this particular song is based on what really happened. The story behind the song is in its verse, which I don't think I will publish. As I say in the lyrics, some time ago, after the worst kind of sleepless night, my doctor came to see me, and after a lot of self-pity, belly aching, and complaining about my insomnia, he looked at me and said, Speaking of doing something about your insomnia, did you ever try counting your blessings? End quote. And that 1952 interaction became Count Your Blessings Instead of Sheep, which was released in 1954 for the wildly popular movie White Christmas. Here are some of those lyrics. Quote, When I'm worried and I can't sleep, I count my blessings instead of sheep, and I fall asleep counting my blessings. End quote.
I love that song. I like that. I love that whole musical. Or is it a musical? Yeah.
It is
Okay.
definitely a musical, yeah.
Okay, sometimes in my brain, I'm like, if it's not entirely music, is it a musical? But to everyone else, yes.
Probably,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what would make the difference between a movie that has songs in it versus a musical, but I think if you break out into song, it's a musical.
Yeah. I think if the characters are singing, not because they're performing themselves in some way, but because
Right.
they're just like singing their story instead of, yeah.
I know the first season of Glee, I didn't watch it all, but I remember reading articles about it when it first came out because it was so interesting because the characters were only singing during and this was just talking about the first season, so I don't know if it held true, but they only sang in the first season when it would make sense for them to be singing, right? They didn't just break into song in weird spots. They were singing because one of them was singing while he was in the shower, or they're singing because they're on stage singing this song. And while it
they're
could
all
get
in a
hammed
show
up
choir,
in it,
so
right? But they didn't break into song for no reason, right? And
yeah.
I don't know, does that make Glee not a musical? Because I certainly feel like it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. But I definitely feel like if you break out into song in a place when no one would break out into song there unless you live in a Disney musical, which sometimes I think maybe I do. But yeah, that's that I think makes it a musical. So White Christmas, definitely a musical though.
Definitely. Yeah. White Christmas is definitely a musical.
All right. Well, up next, we have several modern uses to cover, and we'll get to those right after we say thank you to our sponsors.
Bunny Trails, a word history podcast, has been brought to you by our amazing patrons.
We want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has supported the show over the years, including Heather, Dustin, Cheryl, Adseptic, Charlie, Jill, Erica, Chris, Alan, Donna, and Ernest, plus a very special thanks to some of our higher tiers, including Jan and Emily, as well as Pat Rowe and JGP. And of course, thank you to our top spot, Mary Halsig Lopez.
You can find tons of content from the show's 9 seasons on Patreon at patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. We also have links to the episodes and transcripts or show notes for each episode on our forever home, bunnytrailspod.com.
I want to start in 1968 with the Philip K. Dick novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The title plays on the concept of humans counting sheep and extends the question to non-human life. Here's the synopsis from the publisher. Quote, By 2021, the World War has killed millions, driving entire species into extinction and sending mankind off planet. Those who remain covet any living creature, and for people who can't afford one, companies built incredibly realistic simulacra. Horses, birds, cats, sheep, they've even built humans. Immigrants to Mars receive androids so sophisticated that they are indistinguishable from true men or women. Fearful of the havoc these artificial humans can wreak, the government bans them from Earth. Driven into hiding, unauthorized androids live among human beings undetected. Richard Deckard, an officially sanctioned bounty hunter, is commissioned to find rogue androids and retire them. But when cornered, androids fight back with lethal force. End quote. Now, if like me, you read this book decades ago, you'll know the book talks about 1992, not 2021. But in the mid 2000s, it was updated due to the continued success of the novel. They were going to publish a new audio book version of it with a new reader. Originally, it was done, I think, in '93 by Matthew Modine for like books on tape, that kind of thing. And then they were doing a new version for it for the digital age. So yeah, they changed it then to be 2021 because in 2003 it was definitely that was still a long ways away. So. Now, you may not have heard of this book, but you've almost certainly at least heard of the two movie adaptations based on it, 1982's Blade Runner and the 2017 sequel, Blade Runner 2049. Okay, so Counting Sheep is a 1982 juvenile fiction book by George Mendoza. Here's the short and sweet synopsis from the publisher. Quote, an old shepherd has difficulty putting himself to sleep one night when the sheep won't jump over the fence, but instead engage in all sorts of unusual activities, end quote. I don't know what activities they're engaging in, but I really want to. I want to go read this book now and figure out, what are they doing? Are they
What
I don't know,
sheep?
torching the place? Are they just climbing the wall and jumping on it now instead? Or,
Right?
yeah, I'm curious how absurd it gets.
They're
And the
getting
playing
up
poker.
to Sheepnanigans.
Yeah, exactly. That's very good, Shauna. Very good. Sheepnanigans. Counting Sheep was a marketing campaign by the brand Serta. In it, there were 13 non-sequential sheep, each with their own distinct personality. Here's a quick tongue-in-cheek note from a 2024 Serta blog post about the campaign. Tongue-in-cheek, if you're not familiar with the term, means they're not taking it too seriously. So there's definitely, I wouldn't call this incredibly factual. Quote, way back in 2000, an advertising executive was trying to sleep after a long day at the office. His lumpy old mattress buckled and sank beneath him, and he groaned, why have I put off getting a Serta? Resigning himself to a sleepless night, he made a last-ditch effort to fall asleep and began counting sheep. As number 71 made its graceful arc over the wooden fence the executive knew so well, something occurred to him. When I get my new Serta mattress, he thought, these sheep are going to be out of business. And just like that, the idea of the Serta counting sheep was born. The next morning, the advertising executive approached Serta with his Serta counting sheep concept. We'll make them stars, he said. We just got to find the right sheep for the job. Serta loved the idea, and the worldwide search for the Serta counting sheep was launched. End quote.
Amazing.
Yeah, so each of these sheep, they're non-sequential. So there's like a 1, a 71, a half. There's there's all kinds of different numbers in here, but there were 13 unique ones, and they all had their own unique personalities, so which was kind of part of that campaign.
Fun.
Counting Sheep is a 2004 documentary directed by Frank Green. Here's the synopsis, quote, a naturalist and a big cat tracker team up to save the majestic bighorn sheep roaming California's Sierra Nevada in this documentary. Nature's delicate balance is in peril. The endangered bighorn are preyed on by the protected mountain lion, forcing the outdoorsman to take unusual steps to save the sheep. This film won the Wild and Scenic Environmental Film Festival's People Choice Award and was a finalist at 2 other environmental film festivals. End quote. You can still find that in a couple of places. I saw it on MoviePhone and on Plex. We'll link to both of those in the show notes and on the Patreon. Counting Sheep is a song by Safia off of the 2015 EP Embracing Me. You may also be familiar with the song if you are a Five Nights at Freddy's fan. The song was written about insomnia, and it's definitely got a creepy horror vibe, yet its beat is so catchy that it really sucks you in, which I think is perfect for a song about insomnia, frankly. So here's the first verse in the chorus, quote, I never make a sound, fingers crossed I shut my mouth. Thoughts, they're creeping through my teeth, drip, drop, the night is loud. Silence seems to drown me out, box my thoughts and give me some relief. I want to let you down, make you toss and turn around. Won't you give me what I need? I want to let you down. And I'm always lost and never found. Won't you give me what I need? Tick tock, make me creep, never ending counting sheep. Never get no sleep. Tick tock, make me creep, never ending counting sheep. Never get no sleep. End quote.
I've never heard that before, I don't think.
Yeah, you should check it out. I mean, it's like, honestly, I think you would really enjoy it. And it was very catchy for me as well. So, yeah, it was interesting. Counting Sheep is a 2017 animated short film by Mikhail Warren and Caitlin Hagen. It's less than 3 minutes long, and we'll link to it on YouTube. Here's the synopsis. Quote, an animated short about counting sheep number 100 who never gets his chance to jump over the fence because the sleeper always falls asleep before his turn. Will he finally get his chance? End quote. I will just say it does not go the way I expected it to go.
Oh, okay.
So I would encourage you to watch it if for no other reason than to be like, whoa, oh, okay then. All right.
I was just like thinking, like when someone goes into surgery and they're like count down from 100, it's like there's only 3 numbers that get any attention.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
everybody's out before they get any further.
That's true. Yep. Counting Sheep by Joe Cusack is a 2021 children's storybook. Here's the synopsis from the publisher. Quote, Counting Sheep is a colorful and funny book about a boy who can't sleep and a sheep that won't leap. Trying different ways to get him over the hedge is all they have to do, but at the end of the day, they must be tired too. End quote. I love that idea that the sheep are just like, we're so exhausted jumping over this stupid fence or whatever gate, whatever it is, all the time. So I'm like, yeah, man, like, do they ever get a break? People are sleeping all the time.
That's why it must be good though to get the other animals in there,
Yeah, because some places are counting goats. Yeah.
You don't want the burden all on the sheep.
Yeah, Cervantes is like, no, we'll count goats. They're like, give the sheep a break. Well, I know I tried counting sheep when I was a kid and struggled to get to sleep. Normally because we had a fun thing planned the next day, like going to Six Flags, or it was just Saturday so I could play outside all day. But over the years, I've really mastered the art of falling asleep, and I can now fall asleep almost instantly the moment my head hits the pillow. Which feels like I'm humble bragging, but the skill was not learned through rigorous self-enlightenment, but rather through sheer necessity, working 24-hour shifts, sometimes back-to-back during my decade on an ambulance. So I haven't had much need to count sheep in many years, though I'm excited to come back to it at some point if the opportunity ever arises. That's about all we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It's poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, which decade has the best vibes? Cheryl said, quote, I love the era between the wars. I love the architecture, art, and fashion from that era. The freedom and the first back to the land movement a little earlier, end quote. Jan added, quote, the 80s, the fast food menu options were great. The music was top notch. Paying bills and going to work weren't on my radar, end quote. I mean, it's nice when life is easy.
Exactly.
I have always felt I was born in the wrong decade or perhaps the wrong era, but I don't know for sure which decade had the best vibes or which one I belong in. But I know which people have, and it's the artists, especially musicians. So I say, like, give me the good music and I can survive quite a bit. So the good vibes come with the music for me, not the decades.
Heather said, quote, I'm a 90s kid, but that also comes with good and bad baggage. I'm cringing at the current resurgence of Y2K aesthetics, so I'm going full fantasy mode and pretend I could have actually been a flapper in the roaring 20s, end quote. Oof, same, Heather, yeah. The Y2K aesthetics kill me as well, but I also think it probably makes me an old man yelling at clouds nowadays. My answer to this question is tough because I was a teen in the 90s and I have a lot of fond memories of that time as I found my footing as an adult, moving from being a teen and into adulthood. But I also have a lot of great memories of the mid to late 2000s and 2010s when my family all lived together under one roof before they grew up to be their own adults and moved away. So I have to remove memories and just go with pure vibes, which I think was probably the question anyway. And in that case, I would go with the 1960s because I love the themes of revolution, counterculture, and of course, the Beatles.
Emily said, quote, 1940s to 50s. Give me some poodle skirts and sock hops, please, end quote. And JGP offers probably the most sage wisdom, quote, I think every decade has its positives and negatives. It's just easier to remember the highlights, but forget the bad things of ones that are further from today than the more recent ones, end quote. Thanks to everyone who took part in our silly poll. It's always fun to hear what others think. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember,
Words belong to their users.